On the campaign trail, President Trump vowed to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Treaty. That's the agreement signed by 195 nations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Now, some of his top advisors and some business leaders are urging him to keep the U.S. involved. White House key advisors were scheduled to meet about this today, but the meeting has been postponed for a second time. For more now, we're going to turn to Coral Davenport of the New York Times to talk a little bit about this. So, hey, he said something on the campaign trail. Now, maybe something else is happening. We've seen that before, right? So let's talk about the precedent here. You know, President Trump decided to withdraw. If he decides to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, what sort of blowback are we looking at?
Well, Anne-Marie, as you said, what's distinctive about the Paris Accord is that it is almost universal. 195 countries have signed on. For the U.S., the world's largest economy, largest historic emitter of greenhouse gases, to withdraw, to kind of pick up its cards and pull out and go home, would be a sucker punch, would be a gut punch to the strength of the agreement itself, and it probably would. Diplomats, even Republican foreign policy experts in the Bush administration, a lot of Republicans in Washington are saying the diplomatic impact for the United States, demonstrating that it doesn't keep its word, could resonate far beyond just the issue of climate change and environmental policy. It could reflect into trade negotiations on Iraq. This could be the kind of thing that comes back up and hits the United States again and again and again in efforts to negotiate all kinds of other foreign policy agreements.
And Coral, back in April, you wrote a piece. Policy advisors urged Trump to keep U.S. in Paris Accord. We've seen Fortune 100 companies all voicing very strong support that the United States remain in this agreement. Why do business leaders support it so much?
So we see U.S. corporations across the spectrum, ExxonMobil, Walmart, Apple and Google, strongly and forcefully urging the White House to stay in. One reason is that these companies, many of them have interests all over the world as well. They could be affected by this diplomatic blowback. They also make long-term investment planning based on sort of where the global policy map is going. They've been making investments with the assumption that every country that is signed on to Paris is perhaps very slowly, but still kind of going in the same direction on reducing carbon emissions. That affects investment decisions, long-term investment decisions around the world. So this is something that U.S. corporations are saying, look, this will affect us as players who are invested globally and around the world. It doesn't just hit the White House, it hits the U.S. sort of business world.
And it seems like, at least according to your article, that, just staying at the table and staying in the conversation is what's really valuable to some of the people who are encouraging the president to stay in the accord, not necessarily abiding by it.
Right. So the accord, because it is so large, one of the ways that negotiators were able to bring so many parties to the table is that it doesn't have a lot of legally binding requirements. The point is just to kind of keep everyone together in the same conversation, generally moving in the same direction. That was its big achievement. And so every country, every government has submitted its own plan or pledge or commitment for how much it will reduce global warming emissions. It would be absolutely legally possible for the United States to stay signed into the accord at the table, part of the negotiations of long-term implementation of the accord. And it could, what the Trump administration could do is it could withdraw the emissions reduction pledge from the Obama administration, which was pretty stringent, and say, look, we're going to stay in the agreement. We're not going to do what President Obama said the United States would do. Here's a new plan that represents the Trump economy, the Trump, which is certainly more fossil fuel friendly. That would certainly be seen as a very disappointing move to a lot of these other countries and parties, but it would still keep the U.S. at the table, and it would allow a President Trump's successor to say, okay, well, we're going to ratchet back up. Actually, we're still going to be part of the architecture of the deal. So I think there are a lot of folks in Washington urging President Trump to take that line.
Yeah, and certainly it's not like we haven't seen that before with the president. With the wall. It's going to be a big, beautiful wall, and now it sort of seems like increased border security, but still enough to keep his supporters happy, but not necessarily adhering to exactly what he said on the campaign trail.
Exactly. So the other question, I think, Coral, is that Ivanka Trump was scheduled to meet with the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt about this agreement. What's her role here, and what does her involvement tell us about the White House dynamics here?
Well, certainly we've seen that the president's daughter has his ear. Her role has been, she's very much on the side of stay in the agreement, maybe change the terms, but don't walk away entirely. Shortly after the election, Ivanka Trump met with Al Gore about climate change. She met with Leonardo DiCaprio, who is a prominent climate change activist. She's given a lot of signals that this is sort of the direction. She hasn't spoken publicly on climate change, but our understanding is that she has been urging the president to at least stay in this agreement. She has been tasked with sort of doing an overall review of climate policy. So she is very much seen as pushing the line of stay in, maybe change the terms, but don't walk away entirely. And she does have influence with the president. At the same time, as you mentioned, she met with the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. He is absolutely on the opposite side of the table. He has a lot of clout as the official who will be charged with actually implementing climate change policy. He has been saying that staying in the Paris Agreement presents legal challenges for him if he wants to roll back President Obama's climate change regulations. That point of view is carrying a lot of weight in the White House as well. So these are the two flanks that are trying to come to some kind of consensus. And as you mentioned, this meeting today was canceled, postponed. We believe that one reason for that is that we don't think that they were in a position to come up with any kind of consensus recommendation as of today.
Very interesting. We'll be looking to those developments as we wait to hear from the president what he decides to do. Coral Davenport of the New York Times, as always, thank you.
Thanks. Great to be with you.